Master on Business Analytics from University of Texas at Dallas. So he's going to talk about an information security related topic, can peers reduce employees' violation of information security policies. Please.
All right, thank you very much for having me. I'm happy to be here and present my paper. So I am somehow a social scientist. So I look at the cybersecurity phenomenon from employees' perspective. So I see how employees can improve this information security, how it can ensure that we have a good organization, that basically we don't don't have any kind of breaches. If you look at previous breaches, like Equifax, like Target, are you guys familiar with it? Probably with most of you with the Equifax, yes? So they have a state-of-art technologies. Yes, they have very expensive softwares in place. Target has a $1 million software package in place to protect its assets, information assets. But in all of these cases, what happens is the employee who's in charge of controlling this stuff, the employee who's in charge of cybersecurity, misses some part or make a mistake. For example, in Equifax, there's a vulnerability in their Apache server. The employee who was in charge of it forgot to apply the patch. And what is easier than just attacking a company using what they have, what the vulnerability that everybody knows in the world? So employees are a big part of our cybersecurity management, okay? And that's the approach, that's the perspective that I have. So you can have the best technology in place, you can have expensive software in place, but as long as your employees do not follow the rules, do risky behaviors, you're going to be in danger. It's like giving you the best car with best safety features, but you put the driver who doesn't know how to drive or make a lot of mistakes. It eventually happens. So I'm going to start with a couple of reviews of recent reports, and I'm going to make my case about how employees are important in cybersecurity. Actually, in the literature, in the information security literature, they call employees as the weakest link in cybersecurity lifecycle. So Ernst & Young is one of the biggest, they call it one of the big four auditing company, put out a report last year in 2019, and as you can see here, they said 34% of employees, highest number, think that careless and unaware employees are the most serious issues that they have. That's the most vulnerable aspect of their organization, employees, careless and unaware employees. So we are not talking about people who want to harm your company. We're not talking about people who are trying to sabotage the company. We're talking about people who just doing their jobs, but they make a mistake. They don't follow the rules as they were expected to do. Yes? So 34% were thinking about that as the biggest vulnerability. The next one was outdated security controls, unauthorized access, cloud computing use, so social media issues. But again, the main thing is careless or unaware employees. What are the costs of data breaches? As you can see here, the cost is different for each sector. But an average for the healthcare is around $6 million. For the financial sector is around almost again $6 million. Energy is like 5.5. So every time that you will have a data breach, your whole company take a hit, financial hit, your reputation goes bad, you may go under, basically go bankrupt, or you lose your customers. So one person make a mistake, one person doesn't patch the vulnerability in your system, but everybody in the company pays the price. Is that right? Everybody, if you guys working in a company and you're working on a specific topic, like if you're in a pharmaceutical company and you're making a good, you're making a breakthrough in terms of coming up with the different new prescription drug, and you lose that information through a cyber attack, you're going to be all out of job. So it's not just the person who make a mistake and causes this, but rather the whole company. So the average cost is a lot, financially and other aspects. And again, in this report, which is also put out by IBM, it says 24% of data breaches are caused by human error. Again, huge number, 1/4. From every 4 data breaches, 1 of them is because of human error. So humans are playing a big role. As you can see here, the factor that kind of add to the cost of data breach, if you look at down here, one of the highest is compliance failures, basically not complying with the rules and regulations. So another report, this is in 2016 by LinkedIn. Which security risk are you most concerned about? What is it that keep you, if you're a cybersecurity manager, keeps you awake at night? It is employees who unintentionally exposing sensitive data. That's on top of the list. It's not DDoS attack, it's not malware, that's the employees. Yes, so the question is, okay, so employees are not doing well, so what are you going to do about it? What's the solution? How are you going to come up with what is the strategy to fix this? So if you live in a society that people don't do as they're supposed to do, you come up with the rules, yes? That's why we have rules. When you drive, you have rules. When you have a bunch of rules and norms for your tax, for everything. The same thing is true in the organization. So what we do is, and that's what the organization reported, 76% of them, implementing information security policies with measured compliance. So basically, what are the terms that you have to follow as a main strategy to force employees to comply. So far, this is the background of the research. In general term, this is true for every information security research in this area. This area that I'm working in is called information security policy compliance. So basically, it looks at how we can motivate employees to comply. There are a lot of research on this area. But if I want to sum it up first, there are a bunch of takeaways from what I said so far. First of all, the number one risk is employee. One of the most important risks is employees' carelessness. The other one is implementing information security policies are the main strategy. That's the best way to prevent it. Come up with the rules and regulation and motivate people to do that. However, you can have the best rules in the world, but not getting anywhere if nobody follows them. So if you have the most stringent, let's say, traffic regulations in a city, but nobody follows them, it doesn't do any good for you, yes? People are still driving like probably maniacs, and you have accidents and all kinds of problems. So you have to have people who follow your policies. Unless having just policy doesn't do anything. So organizations in most of the information security literature look at employees as self-interested actors, as agents who are interested in their own benefits. So they don't follow the rules because it takes time. They don't follow the rules because it's difficult, because it's not convenient. Yes? We all like to, sometimes rules are kind of, makes our workload higher, makes our life more difficult. So it's obvious that you have some kind of motivation to not following the rule. So the organization see this non-compliance violation as a way that people kind of maximize their utility, their benefits. So to decrease that, to decrease this perception, they come up with punishments and reward systems. So what they do is this. They say, okay, we're going to implement a surveillance system. We're going to monitor you, and we want to make sure that if you break the rules, you get punished. You pay the price. Okay, so that's the mindset. Organizations think employees are for themselves, so they come up with a bunch of rules and a bunch of methods to catch them and to punish them. This is the common approach in information security. However, I'm thinking it from a different perspective. What I'm saying is, this. I'm saying is that we cannot look at it as from only an individualistic perspective, because employees work in teams, work in organizations. Your action has consequences on others' well-being, in others' jobs, on others' earnings. So if one member fails to comply, it endangers, it puts everybody in the organization at risk. Is that right? If you are going somewhere with a bus and somebody starts yelling and distracting the driver, other passengers in the bus will not sit just quiet. They will probably help calm down that person so the driver can drive, because everybody's life is in danger. Is that right? So it's the same concept. So what I'm saying is information security is a collective effort. It's not just an individual effort. So employees are motivated to pay attention to their peers' behavior. Like what I said about the bus. So people are motivated because it's not just you who gets the consequences, but them as well. So they have a motivation there to pay attention. So what I'm saying is employees are part of the solution rather than the problem. So they're not the problem, but rather they're the solution. So instead of saying that, okay, We have to do surveillance. We have to punish them. Why not we create an environment that they basically police each other. They manage each other. So in that sense, I introduced a concept, and I got that concept from previous literature called peer monitoring. So peer monitoring is when employees who have no formal authority over each other observe each other's actions, look for mistakes and basically wrongdoings, and if they find something that they think is kind of unsafe, risky, they either let the other person know that you're doing this wrong, or if they think it's not going to help, they report it to the higher authority. This is what is called peer monitoring. So if you see something, say something, kind of a behavior, yes? Like a neighborhood watch in some cases. You become your own police. So in that sense, peer monitoring has a bunch of dimensions. You have to observe people. I call it peer noticing. You have to be able to report it. We call it peer reporting. And you have to correct other people. We call it peer correcting. It is also, as it's not part of your job, description role, like a role that's described to you. So peer monitoring is some kind of extra role behavior, meaning that it needs more time and energy. It requires extra effort. Okay, so these are the kind of elements of peer monitoring. And it is also a kind of a civic virtue. Basically, you're doing it for the sake of the community. It's your duty to report something that endangers everybody in a community, yes? So if you see something that's probably this is a very bad behavior, that's something that probably put everybody at risk, it's your civic virtue to report it, yes? So and if there are cases that you can help the person who's making a mistake or doing something wrong, you can just basically help them. So, what are the effects of peer monitoring? So peer monitoring in the management literature has been studied for more than 30 years. It has been shown that with peer monitoring, you can enhance employees' performance in the organization. You can reduce employees' theft. You can reduce the social loafing, basically just not doing anything. You can also reduce accounting fraud. So when you see all these behaviors are kind of unethical behaviors, are kind of behaviors that are not good and damaging, it may also work for the context of information security policy compliance. Why not? Why not? So what I did, the research question that I put forward is this: we're going to figure out and find out whether peer monitoring also influence employees' intention to violate information security policies. So we see, okay, previous researchers showed in different contexts that this thing works. I have a similar context. Let's see whether this also works in my area. And the second question is, okay, even if it works, how can I How can I promote that? How can I make people do peer monitoring? In what kind of environment, what kind of situation, what kind of climate such behavior is possible? So the question that we have, the first thing that we have to answer is in figuring out the effectiveness or whether peer monitoring works in our context is, okay, why peer monitoring? Why do you think peer monitoring will work in our situations? The first thing is, if you think there are people in your group or in your organization who look for other people's mistake, there is some kind of a pressure, psychological pressure on you to follow the rules, because you feel like it is risky. Yes? Think about it. Maybe you find a way to break the rules, to not follow the rules, and you figure it out in a way that the organization doesn't figure it out. So if I do something like this, I know that if there is a monitoring system, there is a surveillance system, it doesn't catch it. But if you have a perception that there are people in your group who will report or correct your mistakes, you will feel that your violation will be not secret anymore. It will be more obvious. So somehow it reduces the secrecy of violations. And believe me, in information security, we have a lot of areas that people violate. For example, in the hospital, it is possible that somebody take a picture of the patient's record. You don't have any kind of system in place to figure that out. But if you know that your fellow nurse or fellow doctor or somebody else will report it to somebody or correct you, you're probably not going to do that. Yes? Or a big problem in many organizations is passwords. How many of you seen that people put their passwords on a sticky note and stick it on to their computer? Have you seen that? They post it on their computer. So there is no policy. This is absolutely against information security policies, but it doesn't happen on a computer system. So if there is some kind of a monitoring or surveillance system on computer, they cannot figure it out. But if you know there are people that may report you or may correct you, you may be motivated not to do that. So it reduces the secrecy, it creates psychological pressure, and it also guides, in some cases, if you do a mistake and somebody tells you, okay, this is not the way to do it, guide you to do the better job. So in that sense, it's good. So that is why we think it may work. The other thing is, to promote peer monitoring, we go and look at a theory called social capital theory. Because think about it, when we talk about monitoring, we talk about an environment that people take advantage of. So if the situation is not good, if the climate is a climate that people think everybody take advantage of them, they may not be involved in peer monitoring because it's not a good thing. So social capital theory says that there are resources within a group that makes that group stronger and makes it more that basically shape the group. One is a concept called collectivism. Basically, whatever you do is to benefit the group. So people should have a tendency to basically sacrifice their own interests in order to enhance or to achieve the group goals. Okay, so that's what is called collectivism. The other thing is groups should be vulnerable. It should be inclined to be vulnerable to the action of others, in a sense that they believe that other people's action will not hurt them. So if somebody do something, it's not that because of hurting me or making my life harder, but rather is because of collectivism. So this is called trust. So in groups you should have trust, so you can act, so you think everybody is doing their job in a sense to not hurt me, but rather to benefit me. And you should know that everybody does his action, do his job or tasks or actions with the mindset of benefiting the group. So if you have these two components, then peer monitoring will make sense. And I'm going to say why. So if you trust each other, you will feel that let me see. Yeah, if you trust each other, you will be confident about other people's actions. So you think that if somebody monitors you, it's not because it's your enemy or want to basically be a rat or something, but rather it is to achieve the goal of the group, which is basically keeping information security assets safe. So in that sense, peer monitoring, if there's a trust, peer monitoring will be perceived as a good thing, as a beneficial thing for a group. It's an action that benefits the group. Okay, so it basically encourages the risk taking. So it encourages other employees to take risk, because sometimes if you report somebody or correct somebody, they may become upset, or they may react badly, or you're going to face a stigma or something like that. If there is a trust climate in your group, you will be encouraged to take risk-taking. And with trust, the ambiguity of intent. So if there is no trust, people will not know your intent. But when there is trust in the group, they know that whatever you do is for the good of the group and basically your organization. So with the trust, you have a facilitator to do peer monitoring. The other thing is, okay, I know with trust I can do it, but then the next question is, okay, that's not enough. That's not enough. So the other factor is what I call collective responsibility, which basically means that if somebody violates the information security policies, and if there is any kind of a data breach, everybody will be to blame. So in that sense, I would say peer monitoring can be promoted when members' misconduct threatens the interests of the other members, and it happens when members will be held responsible for one other member's misconduct. So if you work in a group and one person makes a mistake or cause data breach, and if the climate is in a way that everybody will be blamed because they let this person do this mistake, they either benefited from this violation, so they thought, okay, if this guy shares this, let's say, password with other members, we can do the job faster, or they ignored his or her violations, they will be blamed too, yes? They are also part of the problem. So if you have a climate that says, in any case of incident, not just the violator, but rather the whole group will be held responsible, then you have the environment to monitor each other. This concept is coming from actually financial market. There are part of the world in which there are not much collateral for lending money. So what they do is they lend you money, and you belong to a family or tribe or something like that, and they say if you missed any payment, not only you, but the rest of the tribe will also be punished. So they were not going to get a loan. So it makes the whole tribe or whole group of people motivated to help you make the payment. So this is very common in parts of the world. So this is the same concept. It's called collective responsibility. So the theoretical background, because whenever you propose a hypothesis, when you propose a relationship, you need to have some kind of a theory behind it. We follow the social organizational behavior, which is basically says people do extra work, extra role stuff that help the organization, and we follow also social capital theory, which basically talks about collectivism and trust. So the relationship I propose is this. I say if we have collective responsibility, which basically says if there's something happens, everybody is responsible, and we have trust in the group, we will promote peer monitoring. If we have peer monitoring, the secrecy of violation will be lower, there will be help, there will be psychological pressure, and that causes intention to violate. That causes reduction in intention to violation of ISP. So there's a minus here, meaning that the association between these and these are negative, and the association here is positive. There's this line here as well. So what it basically says is this. If you have a trust in a group, then the relationship between peer monitoring and intention would be stronger in the sense that it discourages violation more. Why? Because people do not react to peer monitoring in a bad way because they trust each other. But if there is no trust, they feel like this is some kind of an act of a revenge, or it's not in their benefit. So if somebody does a peer monitoring, maybe they find other ways to violate, or they don't. If there is some kind of a guidance, they don't follow it. So that's the reason for that. So the first hypothesis that we put out there is this. So peer monitoring is negatively associated with employees' intention to violate ISP. So we talked about that. With peer monitoring, you're going to increase the risk. You're going to increase the accountability. You're going to you're going to communicate to employees that there are people who are willing to spend extra time and effort on this. So it means that it's important because people are willing to spend more energy on it. So the second hypothesis that we mentioned is trust is positively associated with peer monitoring. Basically, what trust does is this. It reduces the concern that employees may exploit or take advantage of peer monitoring. Basically, what it says is peer monitoring is acceptable because we trust each other and it's a good thing. Okay? Information security in different contexts somehow approve this relationship in other ways. So, for example, in other studies, they've shown that employees discuss information security matters with those who they trust, and they say the other study says that when there's a trust, there are more extra role behaviors such as knowledge sharing. And then again, we talked about the moderation. So when you have a good trust, high trust, the peer monitoring will be perceived positively. And then again, when it's perceived positively, people will react to it positively. So there is a theory called social exchange theory, which says if somebody does good thing for me, I'll do good thing for them as well. So that's what's called social exchange theory. So if somebody helped me fixing my mistakes, I will be more inclined to follow his recommendation because there was a good intention there. But if there is no trust, people may interpret peer monitoring negatively as an act that that wants to exploit them and react to it negatively. And the last thing is collective responsibility. So collective responsibility says any violation will basically imperil the interests of the group, and in case of any violation, everybody will be held responsible. So it creates an environment that people want to do peer monitoring because they don't want to be blamed, they don't want to be held responsible. So in that sense, they'll do that. So think about it. If you have an environment that if somebody violates and there's a data breach, nobody will be held responsible, there will be no motivation to do peer monitoring because it's extra work, it's extra effort. So you're not interested in doing that because you're not on the hook, at least directly. So it basically says it's going to be bad for you in terms of organizational financial sense and other stuff, but also we're going to make sure that you will be responsible. So to do that, to test my hypothesis, I gathered data from different organizations using a panel of US employees. So I asked them whether they have their job requires them compliance with information security policies. I show them what information security policies look like. What are those? I asked them whether they work in some kind of a work group, like a team or department, and if any of these requirements didn't meet, I basically exclude them from the survey. I did my survey in two waves. In the first wave, I sent invitation to around 1,000 people, and after 2 weeks, I asked them to answer another part of the survey, and 250, I guess, 4 of them continued to do so. So in the first survey, we asked about trust and collective responsibility and peer monitoring, and the next survey we talked about we ask about their violation, their intention to violation. To measure intention to violation, obviously people will not report that they're going to violate the information security policies. It doesn't make sense. There is what is called social desirability bias, which basically says that people are willing to report more positively. So to avoid that issue, what we did was we designed 4 scenarios. So in each scenario, I can show it to you. In each scenario, we described an employee who violate information security policies, and we asked the participant, if you were this employee, what would you have done? Would you violate or would you comply? So that kind of question. And to ask about peer monitoring, use these items, collective responsibility is similar, and trust same way. So we measured every aspect of our model using questionnaires, and those questionnaires are very common.
I think I don't get why didn't you do the cross-sectional? Why did you do the longitudinal study?
So it's not real longitudinal in a sense, because in longitudinal studies, your DV and IV are the same thing, and then you do it twice. We did this to reduce the impact of common method bias. So when you don't have everything at one time, you will have, they call it temporal effect, so time effect. So when there is this gap between surveys, there's less common method bias, so people don't answer everything the same way. So we used a software called AMOS, SPSS AMOS, to test our model. The approach that we use, the statistical approach we use, is called structural equational modeling, or SEM. When you do this kind of studies, you should have some measures in thresholds, meeting some thresholds. Our model looked good in terms of statistically, and these are the coefficients for our study. So basically what it says, trust and collective responsibility, there is a positive correlation, which is significant statistically. So the hypothesis 1 and 2, these hypotheses 2 and 4 are supported. Peer monitoring to intention to violation, the ISP, was also significant, so peer monitoring negatively impacts the intention to violate ISP, and then our moderation worked as well. What does it mean? It means that we divided our sample to 2 groups. In one group, there are people who have low perception of trust in their groups. In that sense, the impact of peer monitoring, as you can see, is lower, not weaker, basically. And there is a group with higher level of trust. In that group, the impact is stronger. So what does it mean? It means that, and the difference between these 2 impacts are also significant. So basically what it means that when you have higher trust, for groups who have higher climate of trust, peer monitoring works better. So if we want to discuss our results, so our results show that peer monitoring is effective. So the hypothesis that we put forward at first works. Our research question, the first research question, was kind of answered. This is consistent with the management literature. So we brought this concept to the information security literature, and we showed that it works. We also confirmed that the climate of trust and collective responsibility creates an environment that makes peer monitoring effective, or kind of promotes peer monitoring. And Again, these are also in line somehow with previous literatures, not in the exact form, but differently. So when we do research study, we always think about what kind of contribution we will have for theory, how we contribute to the literature that we are working in. So first of all, we introduced a new concept, a new way of basically encouraging people to comply. Previously, if you look at the previous literature, when we talk about social influence, when we talk about peers, we always look at them passively. What do I mean by passively? Is this. We always thought about, okay, what other people expect me to do. So passively, you have a perception that your friends or your family or your boss think that you should do this way, and that's why you did this. You act in a certain way. Here, we are introducing an active way an active approach, basically saying that, okay, it's not just the perception that you have. Peers can actively get involved to help you, to encourage you to comply by correcting you, by create a perception that they're going to report you or something like that. So with peer monitoring. So in that sense, we are contributing to the literature. And at the end, we introduce the concept of trust and collective responsibility. There are hints in the literature about these two concepts, about the social context that promotes peer monitoring. But empirically, the way that we did it, the way that we measured it, it has not been done before. So that's going to be a contribution to the literature as well. When we talk about, again, when we do a research, we think about practical implications as well. What kind of implication my approach, what I've done, has for real world, for managers. The first thing is we introduce peer, we put forward and we show that peer monitoring can be something that can help them reduce ISP violations, non-compliances. And it can be a preferable approach because it is done by employee, so it's less costly, way less costly. You don't need any equipment. And it is much more effective because it captures a broad variety of behaviors. You have people who look at other people and figure out what's wrong and what's not wrong. So it's much more effective than, let's say, surveillance system or something like that. The other thing is, as I mentioned, sometimes it takes time or it's impossible to detect something. I gave you the example of a hospital computer monitoring system cannot identify a doctor who repeatedly take a picture of patients' profiles. It cannot be done. With peer monitoring, you can capture that. Sometimes it's going to, if you don't act immediately, it's going to be too late. With peer monitoring, especially in the intervention and correcting aspect of it, we can stop the violations or we can correct the mistake on a spot. For instance, when a group member notices that their peers have written their personal password and a sticky note, they can intervene by explaining the correct practice. Okay, so they can tell, okay, this is not right. Somebody can see this. Somebody can take advantage of this. Because if we learn anything about data breaches, the first thing that hackers do is to get the user and passwords. That's all they try. The first thing they try to do is to get you to reveal your user and password some way, somehow. That's how targeted attack happened. What they did, they got the user and password, the first thing. That's why we have so many phishing emails out there. So if there is something serious, we have to stop it as soon as possible. The other implication is, so we talked about collective responsibility, we talked about trust. Organizations should be engaged in activities that can increase the trust amongst their employees. They should somehow create the perception that if something happens, if there is a data breach, there is a violation, everybody is responsible. So if they do that, they can expect to see more peer monitoring. Okay? And in future research, you should have, there are people who talk about how we can have a mechanism in place that if there's somebody wants to report something, they feel safe, or how organizations should basically give this perception that if somebody reports something or corrects something, these kind of reports will be taken seriously and will be acted upon. So those are different, these are out of the scope of this study, but these are basically the implications for the practice. So now it's time for Q&A. If you have any question, please.
Any questions?
Yeah. Yes.
Regarding so when you're talking about peers, you would have to have a minimum number of within the group in order for it to be effective, right?
Yes.
Because like if you're in the minority that's reporting people, then you become a bit of a pariah in against maybe your peers, and then.
So what we are asking, at least in our survey, is that the perception that there is such a practice in the group. So we are not saying, we are not asking that, oh, these 2 people in my group do this and the rest don't do this. That's not the, so then if that's the case, the perception will be low because not everybody do this, so they report at the lower spectrum.
Okay.
So somehow my measurement captures this.
Okay.
Yeah, so if one person in a group of 20 do that, so probably the other people don't have the perception.
Okay.
Not this, yes.
I can see that how peer monitoring is beneficial for information security, but was there any research that investigates the negative effects of that? So I can imagine scenarios that...
Yes, exactly. That's why we have the trust. No, actually this is the first time we're bringing this concept to the information security. So there are a lot of avenues for future researchers. There are studies out there that they say if you have trust, you don't need to do peer monitoring, yes? But that's a different kind of trust. You trust that everybody follows the rules, you don't need to monitor. There are studies that basically Reagan motto that says, trust but verify. So there are different views on this. If you look at the management literature, there is a relationship between trust and monitoring, peer monitoring, the positive relationship. There is a negative relationship. There is a moderation. There are so many ways that people investigated that. But in the context of information security, there is nothing. But to your point, there are in the literature, in the management literature, they looked at that. Yes. Any other question? Yes.
So I just don't think peer monitoring is a low-cost thing because people need to contribute time to monitor others' mistakes and they
Yes.
are careless mistakes. So like overall speaking, maybe it may reduce the mistakes in the information security area, but overall the utility of this team may be dragged down.
Yeah, in a sense you're right, because the cost will be on employees and their time. Okay, but since it's what is called extra role, you don't pay for that. So if you compare it to us investing $2 million, maybe the cost is kind of with the employee. So there is a cost, but the organization will not pay for it. That's why for the managers, it's...
But there are some other like not evaluated missing value because of
Exactly,
extra time
I agree.
of the
Exactly,
part.
I agree with you. And the other area of future research is whether peer monitoring will impact team performance. And that would probably answer your question, because if it reduces team performance, then there's a cost there, and that is the cost of not meeting the performance metrics. Yes, you're right. Thank you for that. Thank you very much, and I appreciate it.